I live in the quiet countryside where nothing happens. I'm an 18-year-old girl who can easily walk around my hometown alone without being scared because it's really safe here. Me and my dog went out for a walk one evening. It was nice weather outside, so I decided to go to a nearby field. I usually let my dog out of her leash there, so it was fun for the both of us. She's a nice dog and always comes when I call for her. We get to the field and everything is going really well, and nothing seems off, except I have this odd feeling in my gut that I usually never have. The last time I had this feeling was when I was 8 years old and we were driving at night with my family. I had the same feeling then and told my parents that I feel like something's wrong and that they should be careful. They slowed down because I was oddly serious at that moment. A minute after I said it, a deer came out of nowhere, and we would have been crushed if we had gone at the same speed as a minute before. We were all shocked, and my mom thanked me. I still remember it like it was yesterday. However, in the field 10 years later, I get the same gut feeling. I think whatever and keep going, completely ignoring it. We roll around the fields in the nearby forest until the sun starts to set. I put my dog back on her leash and decided to leave from one of the tiny paths that go through a small forest. It's the quickest way to my home. It's not a popular way to go, but it's quick. As I'm walking along that path, I suddenly spot a silhouette at the end of the road, just before the forest starts. I think nothing of it at that point and just keep walking. But just after a little while, I have a strong gut feeling and stare at the silhouette for a while. It's then that I notice the silhouette is staring at me without moving. I just think that maybe they were waiting for someone, because at first the silhouette looked like a child's. But as I get closer, I realize that it wasn't a child, but a grown man who was riding a child's bicycle. It was a blue-green boy's bicycle. His legs were way too long for it, and his body looked like he was forcing himself to ride it. It was a really unsettling sight. Still, my dumbass didn't want to turn around and have a couple of kilometers waste of time. Even though it was creepy looking, I still thought that maybe he was waiting for someone to come from my way. But every step I take, he follows me with an intense expression. I'm only like 20 meters away from him when he starts to do weird jumps on his bike, smiling the ugliest and most unsettling smile I've ever seen, just staring at me with wide eyes. He kinda looks like he was expecting something and is so excited about it that he needs to jump. He looks like he's in his 50s or something. Very long and thin legs and arms, bald and that creepy unsettling smile. That's when my alarm rings went on. I glanced behind me and no one was there. It was just me, an 18-year-old small girl with her fluffy dog. I did a 360 and started to jog where I came from just in case. I glanced at him and sighed in relief when I noticed he wasn't following me or anything. I thought that maybe he wasn't waiting for me after all, and called myself stupid and a scaredy cat. I was so wrong. My adrenaline starts to slow down again as I'm in the middle of the fields and I still see no sign of him following me. I let my dog out of her leash again and she starts to run around. I'm nearly at the end of the field when my dog spots a rabbit or deer or something interesting and flies towards it. I panic because she's never done that before and I yell for her. I yell plenty of times for her loudly and she finally comes back. I'm relieved that nothing happened to her, but as I put her back on her leash, I notice something from the corner of my eye. The bald long legs dude is biking towards me. He's not looking at the ground when he bikes, but me. Freaking out wasn't enough to express my feelings in that moment. I've never seen a human who looked so crazy. What surprised me the most was that he was biking through a field, and I can tell you that it is not an easy field to even walk sometimes. It has muddy ponds that you need to bike over, but that cycle just biked through them. He was struggling a lot to bike there, but somehow managed to still do it. I didn't watch for another second behind me because I just started running. I ran full speed and I have asthma, and I ran so fast that I saw black and nearly collapsed. My lungs hurt so bad that I thought I was dying, but the adrenaline kept my blood running and my legs too. Once I glanced behind me and he was there, struggling badly to keep up his full speed on the field grounds with that ugly white smile and the way too little bike. After that, I just ran like crazy until I found the house, hid in their yard without even minding that I was in someone else's yard. It didn't matter to me in that moment at all. I waited a while with my breathing stuck in my throat, but he didn't come. I was planning to yell as loudly as I could if he found me. At some point, the adrenaline started leaving my system, and I left my hiding spot. I ran again until I reached an area, which had multiple people in their yards, so I would have help if I saw him again. I typed 911 into my phone, but couldn't bring myself to call, mostly because I had no proof, and didn't want my parents to find out because they were overprotective, so I probably wouldn't leave my house anymore. I've been paranoid after this incident. My dog was frightened too. I guess she noticed something was really off too. I swear I will always listen to my gut when it's telling me something from now on. I'm still scared of him. I can't forget his awful smile. I feel like he's gonna jump on my window one night and do what he wants to me. I feel paranoid and helpless. I'm still thinking about calling the police. I used to do DoorDash to make some money, as I was unemployed at the time. I was 19 and a 5-foot tall girl, so I never went alone, just in case I came across a sketchy delivery. One day, I decided to DoorDash with my younger sister, who was 3 years younger than I am, and is also a small girl, maybe just an inch taller than I was. My sister and I decided we were going to DoorDash in another town, about an hour away. Everything was going great. We got many orders while we were there, until another order popped up on my screen, an order of $100 worth of food from Chili's. So of course I took it, thinking I would get a big tip from the order that big. My sister and I went to pick up the order, and we were happily on our way to make this delivery, talking about how it may be for a party since it was so late in the day and dark out. The map directions were leading us into the far outskirts of town, surrounded by an empty flatland and scattered properties such as farms and ranches, which was pretty normal in the state of New Mexico. As we reach our destination, there was a decent sized house on a long stretch of road and seemed to be the only house in sight. It almost seemed in the middle of nowhere, but of course, my sister and I thought nothing of it, so we pulled up into the driveway. Upon pulling into the driveway, we see two men standing out front drinking a beer, and thought maybe they were having a party, waiting for their order to finally arrive. My sister and I stepped out of the car with the order, and I yelled DoorDash for so-and-so's name. The men looked at each other, then said no, that they didn't order anything, and started slowly approaching us. Then we realized they were visibly drunk. My sister and I quickly became uncomfortable, as we were both standing outside of the car. Thankfully, my sister was with me. She was the first to react quickly, telling me to get in the car. At the time, I didn't know what I was thinking. I just remember freezing up and standing there watching as the men got closer. That was when I somewhat snapped out of it and got in the car, still a bit frozen, never taking my eyes off the guys. As we got back in the car, I still remained frozen in fear, and my sister yelled at me to quickly lock the doors. Still not breaking my gaze at the men, I slowly reached over to feel for that little divot or bump that is usually used to tell which button is which. Thank God for that little divot, otherwise it would have been too late since the two men were on both sides of my car. The guy in the driver's side door was just staring into the window at me, sipping his beer, which was pretty creepy, but the other guy blocking the passenger door where my sister was sitting was being far more creepier, saying things like "come on out" and that they don't bite in the most unsettling way possible. My sister kept telling him to go away. He then asked if they can have the order, and we said no, then kept asking for us to roll down the window to see what kind of food we had. So my sister held the bag open showing the guy, and he still insisted that we should roll down the window since he couldn't see apparently. My sister turned to me and said we should leave. I assumed the guy heard us or realized what she was saying and tried yanking on the door handle to get in. My sister yelled go, so I started the car and quickly shifted the car into reverse, backing out of there as fast as I could. Then we drove down the road a bit and pulled over, since we were barely processing what the hell just happened and still had an undelivered order and needed to figure out where it needed to go since that was the only house in sight. I pulled out my phone to check the order, and it says in the instructions, trailer parked out back, honk upon arrival. So we drove back and parked in front of the house, hoping not to see those guys again, but it seems they have gone inside, and slightly behind but to the side of the house was a small camper. It didn't even look like someone was living in it, since there was no lights on and it was dark out. I hesitated, but did as the instructions said, so I honked. My sister and I waited, but there was no response, and we sure as hell weren't going to go up and knock, as we didn't feel safe. I even tried calling the customer's phone number multiple times, but it always went to voicemail. I decided to call DoorDash support and explain to them how I didn't feel safe. They pretty much told me to leave the food in a safe place for the customer to find. Of course we couldn't do that, so I continued to explain to her that we were in the middle of nowhere, and in her response, she said there was nothing they could do to help my situation, other than just leave it somewhere safe. I just agreed with her and hung up. My sister and I sat there for a while, contemplating if I should just cancel the order and go home, but I didn't want a complaint called on me, until my sister suggested that I just go ahead and cancel the order and go home, since our safety was far more important. Who cares if I lost my job as a DoorDasher? It's better than putting our lives in danger for a job that only pays pocket change. So I canceled the order, and we made our trip back home. We were pretty much silent a majority of the ride, and didn't even bother trying to take on any more orders, as that incident ruined our whole mood. We were scared more than anything. My sister and I ate the food on the way back home, and it was pretty good, but I still wonder if that was a luring tactic, especially since I had canceled and didn't deliver $100 worth of food, and I never got a single complaint about it, or a bad rating of any sort. If I had ordered that much food and never received it, I would have definitely made a complaint. And now that I realize it, there were no visible cars around the property, since we thought it was for a party at first. The whole situation never sat right with me, and still scares me to this day, wondering what could have happened to me and my sister. I was on vacation with my family when I was about 14. I was in the pool, which had a bar attached, and I was casually talking to this group of British people. I want to say it was all guys, but I think I remember a girl with them. I started drinking a bit with them. The legal drinking age was 18, but the people who I was drinking with gave me an extra wristband they had because apparently they were leaving the resort that day and wanted to give it to someone. My parents didn't know about this, and neither of them knew I was drinking. They were clearly a lot older and kept putting drink after drink in my hand, and I was ecstatic because I was getting drunk in the pool in Cancun and out of sight of my mother. They started to try to convince me that one of the guys in the group was 15 and that I should talk to him because he liked me. Even then, I knew he definitely wasn't 15, but he also wasn't as old as the others who seemed to be in their late 30s. In hindsight, I'm thinking mid to late 20s. I was young and just thought they were joking around with me. They kept telling me he liked me and I should go hang out with him. I laughed it off at first, but they kept suggesting. Keep in mind, this whole time my dad was in the same pool talking to his friend, and he had his eyes on me for almost the whole time. My parents are very strict. He didn't know what I was drinking was alcoholic, and the pool was big enough you couldn't hear what was being said. At that point, I was totally wasted, and my first time actually getting seriously drunk. I don't even remember leaving the pool with this guy trying to tell me he was 15, but apparently my dumbass did because I remember thinking he was cute. The resort is huge, and I don't know how I walked through the whole thing without remembering it. The next thing I remember is walking and approaching a bus stop that was a 10-minute walk from the resort, and he sat on the bus bench and pulled me onto his lap. At this point, my world is spinning, so I didn't protest even though I remembered thinking I wanted to be back at the pool. It was then that something beautiful happened. I threw up all over him. I'm on his lap at this point, so it was right in his face and on his chest, and I kept throwing up like the Exorcist level projectile vomiting. He was extremely grossed out, and I don't remember what was said, but we ended up walking back to the resort, and I never saw him again. I remember feeling so embarrassed, which is ridiculous in hindsight. I wobbled back to the pool area, covered in throw up, where my mom had called the police and her and my dad were freaking out. My mom's piercing voice sobered me up a bit because I remembered these parts a lot clearer, even though I was still hazy. They saw how drunk I was and demanded to know what happened, so I told them. Then they got furious. My mom was adamant on finding that guy or his friends who had all disappeared from the pool. I didn't really see what the big deal was back then and why she wanted to find them. To this day, I think about what would have happened if I hadn't thrown up like that and actually left with them. I was 5'2" and 14 years old, and he was at least a foot taller than me, and definitely not a minor. I remember when he was close to me with no one around, and even in my extremely drunken state, I started to get a bit nervous. My parents took me back to our hotel room, and I spent hours in the bathtub just throwing up. My mom was furious. I wasn't too surprised at that, because she yelled at me over trivial things all the time. So was my dad, which surprised me because he was always so easygoing, and honestly probably would have been a bit amused at me being drunk and throwing up. Not in a cruel way, but because I was learning a lesson about alcohol that we all do eventually. He actually straight up told me that at some point before this whole vacation. But now I know that his anger wasn't directed towards me. He was cursing about the guy. I was still throwing up in the bathtub, and they had both went into the kitchen area to talk away from me. But I could vaguely hear my dad cursing terribly while speaking to my mom in our native language, and I was actually scared. I couldn't quite focus on this voice because I was legitimately drifting in and out of consciousness at that point. But I remember getting less scared and more just sad because I felt like I had disappointed him. I remember wondering why they were making such a big deal. It was a few years later that I understood. Later on that day, I expected my mom to blow up at me over dinner when I was sober, as she usually does. But they were both kinda just quiet and staring at me and didn't leave my side. I can't imagine what they were going through, knowing about the danger I had been in hours before.